Alright everyone, it's fun to watch Wapo specifically, but the legacy media in general side with a bunch of rioting, looting thugs in Portland. They've done this in Seattle and other places too, Minneapolis. They call them protesters, and now they're flummoxed because apparently the DHS and feds have shown up and actually, they've questioned and detained people at various times in their defense of federal buildings in Portland. Let me argue the really simple version of why not only is it okay for this to be going on, it's actually constitutionally necessary. Unfortunately, it would be unlawful, I think, at some point for the federal government not to step in. And Razorfist pointed out that he was correct, and I agree, I concur with this, that this is exactly, the left wanted a federal response, and what we're seeing now is sort of the watered-down microcosm of how they would have acted had he acted on a larger scale, and I hate to tell you so, too. I hate to tell you that I told you so to all the people on the right that said Trump needs to send in the troops and crack some commie skulls. Look at what the legacy media is now successfully pushing, which is the idea that federal troops guarding federal buildings is authoritarian and evil and wrong and proves that Trump wants to be a little dictator or something. Here's why it's okay and necessary. Those buildings are federal property. They're not owned by Portland. They're not owned by the state. They're owned by the federal government at large, collectively for the people of the U.S. The taxpayers already built these buildings. The taxpayers fund the staff that are inside them, in some cases being held all but hostage by rioters. It is the responsibility of the government to defend that property. It's the constitutional right of the federal government to use its troops to detain people and question them if they're trying to commit a crime on federal property. You try going into a federal building sometime and doing something wrong and see what happens. You'll be in a room with several very friendly but stern-faced gentlemen in suits who will ask you all sorts of questions. You'll be very lucky if you don't get charged with anything. Disclaimer, I'm absolutely not suggesting that you should actually attempt to do anything in a federal building. Because then this happens. You'll get detained. And guess what? They have wide latitude to detain and to question you. They say, oh my God, they're giving people their rights. You don't have a right to riot. You don't have a right to loot. Now, the city of Portland can sit back, put its thumb in its ass, and let you break the law with impunity. And a bunch of Soros prosecutors can decide not to bring charges. And a bunch of Soros judges can throw them out if a non-Soros prosecutor is operating there. And a bunch of far-left miscreant assholes in your state and local governments can sit there and call you protesters and turn a blind eye to the fact that you're terrorizing the people of those communities. But the federal government won't. And that's the difference. This is federal property that they're guarding. These people aren't just wandering around in the streets of Portland looking for people to detain. Although if they did, it would be awfully funny. They're saying, well, this violates the Constitution. It violates people's right to privacy. It violates their right to assemble. It's really funny to see the left defend that. It violates the right to fair trial and all of this stuff. No, it doesn't. These people are being identified as being part of hordes of looters who have staged violent insurrections, committed thousands of arsons all across the United States, belong in some cases to groups legitimately classed by numerous nations and states alike as terrorist organizations. You've got shootings, you've got assaults, you've got random acts of vandalism and other violence. A federal building is guarded by federal troops. If the federal government feels that the local authorities and the state authorities are not capable of defending those buildings adequately, they're going to send in the goats. And more power to them for doing so. They showed great restraint in waiting until now to actually do this. Trump showed great restraint. It's funny because they're reacting exactly how I predicted that they would react. Oh, he's an authoritarian, a brutal tyrant, dictator wannabe. No, he's not. He's not. He didn't call up and say, well, send the troops to the federal courthouse in Portland. He didn't do that. What, are you delusional? He didn't even have to make the call. Some local DHS authority did. Some local mid-level agent sent in a couple dozen dudes to guard the building. And it was funny because they're like, well, these guys aren't even wearing proper insignia. We thought maybe they were a militia. How? We're so scared. You've made the entire goddamn community terrified because you've been burning it to the goddamn fucking ground and because the local authorities have done goddamn nothing about it except for taking people who are members of criminal organizations and when they're brought up on charges saying, well, there's coronavirus, so bye. We're letting them back out. If they charge them with anything, the sentence is deferred, so they just go right back out and keep looting. Thousands of violent criminals in Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis have run roughshod over these cities now for weeks. Finally, the federal authorities have said enough is enough because they're approaching federal property. The state has no legitimate authority over it. You have no legitimate complaint. The Seattle mayor and the mayor of Portland have no complaints about this. You have no legitimate authority over the federal property that's located there. If anything, you should be really happy because those dudes are really overpaid, so they add a lot of tax money to your local economy. Yeah, a lot of my money, by the way, as a taxpayer. Well, that property is collectively... I have a little bit of a share in that federal property, even though I'm not in Portland, because it's federal property. It's not state property. It's not a town building. It's not a private structure. The federal government funded it with my money. I expect it to be defended. And then, again, you've got employees inside these buildings, and you get the night janitor, and they're fucking scared shitless, wondering if it's legal for him to defend himself with a mop, or if he's going to get brought up on assault with a deadly weapon charges if he keeps his skull from getting cracked into the ground. Bunch of horse shit. So, yeah, it's nice to watch the legacy media side with literal criminals. Yeah, they weren't doing anything wrong. They were just throwing, like, shooting paintballs and throwing cans at the building and stuff. They just tried to break down a door, but that's not, it's a non-violent riot. It's a riot of peace, tolerance, diversity, and love. Can't you see that from the fact that they have communist insignia on their armbands? That they look like the fucking KGB? The soy GB? That's what they look like to me. Not exactly the most intimidating on their own, now are they? But the thing is, they get together in mobs of hundreds or thousands of people. Yeah, they'd like to damage property. It's their favorite activity. They don't have any jobs, so they don't have anything else to do. I'm gleeful that the federal government is doing this. It's totally legal. It was funny because some people, like some of the anti-Trump were like, well, as a libertarian, you have to condemn this. No, I don't. It's federal property. You've got people engaged in acts of violence and vandalism gathering at federal property. There is nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government must let them vandalize the building unless shots are fired. It's not real. That's not in the Constitution. Rioting is not a civil right. That's about all. Peace out.